I was 68 years old when I stepped into that airport, and I swear that even today I can still feel the chill on my back when I remember the wind that hit my face as soon as I stepped out of the automatic door. It wasn't just the cold weather. It was the cold of being completely alone in a place where I didn't understand a single word of what the people around me were saying. I gripped my old suitcase so tightly that my fingers turned white. Inside it, everything I owned in the world. 3 changes of clothes, a worn-out coat, a photo of my daughter, whom I hadn't seen in years, and 500 reais converted into dollars that barely covered a week's worth of food. 500 reais. That was the value of my life at that moment. I looked at the people running from one side to the other, talking fast, laughing, hugging each other, and I felt invisible, as if I were a ghost walking in the middle of that crowd. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw me. And maybe it was better that way, because if someone really looked, they would see the fear etched on my face. But you know what's scarier than not knowing where to go? It's about knowing exactly what you left behind. I had a house, a simple house, but it was mine. I had a kitchen where I spent hours preparing food for those I loved. I had a routine, a place, an identity, until my husband died. And then I discovered that none of that was truly mine. His family took everything. The house, the few pieces of furniture that were worth anything, even the pots and pans I used every day. They said I had no right to anything, that I was just the widow, and suddenly I was nobody anymore. I lived on the streets for 3 weeks before I could save enough money for that plane ticket. I slept in shelters, begged for help, accepted food from strangers, and every time I closed my eyes at night, I thought, either I die here or I try something impossible. And impossible was starting over from scratch in a country I didn't even know where it was on the map. But do you know why I came? Because staying meant accepting that my life was over. It meant dying little by little, swallowing humiliation, living off handouts, becoming a burden. And I preferred to risk everything rather than live like that. Even without speaking the language, even without knowing anyone, even with only 500 reais in my pocket. That first night, sitting on an airport bench because I didn't know where else to go, I made a promise to myself. I didn't yet know how I was going to keep it, but I swore that one day people would know who I was. Not out of pity, not out of charity, but because I would build something with my own hands, something that no one could take from me. And look, I had no idea that promise would take me to places I never imagined. Places where I would be tested in brutal ways, where I would lose everything again, and where, against all odds, I would find something much greater than myself. And before I tell you what happened that first night alone when I made a promise that would change everything, leave a like on this video, because you'll need to remember this moment when you get to the end of the story. And subscribe to the channel, because this journey is just beginning. You still don't know what I was able to build with those 500 reais, but I guarantee you, what comes next will prove to you that nothing is impossible when you decide that going back is not an option. Stay with me until the end. It's worth every second. The first night was spent in a public shelter. I didn't know it existed until a woman on the street gestured to me. She was saying something I didn't understand, but she pointed in a direction and repeated the same words several times. I just followed. When I got there, there was a huge line, all kinds of people. Men sleeping standing up, leaning against the wall, women with children in their arms, young people who seemed to have given up on everything, and me, a 68-year-old woman, holding my suitcase like it was a baby. I got a spot, a thin mattress on the floor, next to 20 other people. The smell was of mold mixed with sweat and something I still can't describe, something that only extreme poverty has. I lay down there, but I didn't close my eyes for a second. I held my bag against my chest all night. Inside it, besides the few dollars I had left, was that picture of my daughter. She was 7 years old when we took that picture. She was laughing, with her front teeth missing. I looked at that image and wondered if she still remembered me. Would she forgive me for disappearing like that? For leaving everything behind, including her? But the truth is, I had no choice. When my husband died, his family not only took the house, they separated me from my own daughter. They said I was unstable, that I wasn't capable of taking care of anyone. They lied so much about me that even she started to believe them. And when I tried to fight, when I tried to prove them wrong, they told me it would be better if I disappeared, that it would be better for everyone. So that's what I did. I disappeared. I took the money I managed to save doing laundry for others, bought that ticket, and came to a place where nobody knew me, where nobody could judge me for what I had lost. But that night, lying on that filthy mattress, listening to people crying softly around me, I wondered if I had made the right choice, if it wouldn't have been better to stay, even if it meant living on crumbs, accepting humiliation, swallowing silence, because at least there I would be close to her, even from afar, even without being able to touch her. But then I remembered the promise I made at the airport, and I realized that if I gave up there, that first night, I would be telling myself that they were right, that I was truly worthless, that I was disposable, and that I couldn't accept. So I stayed awake all night, staring at the cracked ceiling, and I started making plans, absurd plans for a woman my age, without money, without the language, without anything. But I had one thing that no one could take from me, something that had been in my hands since I was a child, something that had always been mine, even when everything else was stolen. I knew how to cook, and not just any food. I knew how to make food that healed, food that made people stop what they were doing just to smell it, food that brought back memories, that soothed pain, that brought families together. My grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her. Recipes passed down from generation to generation, seasoned not only with ingredients, but with stories, with love, with resilience. That night, while everyone slept, I made a different promise, more specific, more real. I was going to use what no one could steal from me to build something that would be solely mine. On the third day, I got a job. It wasn't anything dignified, nothing I could boast about, but it was something. Washing dishes in a large restaurant, one of those that serves hundreds of people a night. The manager looked me up and down when I arrived, my clothes crumpled and my hair tied back with an old elastic band. He looked doubtful, but he must have sensed I was desperate. He said something quickly, which I didn't understand, and pointed to the back. I followed him to a huge kitchen, full of people running around, pots banging, knives cutting, high heat, shouts in English that sounded like urgent orders. He put me in front of a huge sink, full of piles of dirty dishes. He made a simple gesture. Wash. I understood. I stayed there for 12 hours that first day. My hands were red and swollen. My skin started to crack from the industrial soap. It hurt so much I could barely hold the sponge. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because if I stopped, if I showed weakness, they would fire me, and I had nowhere to go back to. But there was a moment that day that changed everything. The chef, a large man with a deep voice, threw away a tray full of vegetables, carrots, zucchini, potatoes. They were perfect, just a few bruises, some dark spots. He yelled something about quality standards and dumped everything in the trash. I stared at it as if I were watching money being thrown away, because that's exactly what it was. Food wasted while I barely had anything to eat. I waited for the end of my shift. When everyone had left and I was finishing cleaning up, I went back to that trash can. I looked around. Nobody. I picked up the vegetables. I washed everything carefully, removed the bad parts, and put them in my bag wrapped in a plastic bag. Did I feel ashamed? Yes, but the hunger was greater than the shame, and something inside me knew that those vegetables weren't trash. They were an opportunity. I went back to the room I had rented, a tiny cubicle I shared with 3 other people. There was an old electric stove in the corner. I waited for everyone to fall asleep. I grabbed the vegetables, chopped everything with a dull knife I found there, and started cooking. I used some leftover oil from someone else, salt I borrowed, and spices I had brought with me in my suitcase. Spices from my homeland, from my grandmother. While the food cooked, the smell began to spread, first through the room, then down the hallway, and suddenly I heard knocking on the door. I opened it. It was one of my roommates, a thin man who never spoke. He pointed to the pan and gestured as if asking what it was. I smiled. I grabbed a plastic plate, put some of the food on it, and gave it to him. He ate right there, standing up, and when he finished, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected. Surprise, gratitude, and something else. Respect. The next day he brought 2 coins. He placed them in my hand and gestured for more food. I didn't quite understand at first, but then I realized he was paying me. He wanted me to cook again. And that's how it started, slowly, silently, without anyone noticing. I cooked at night, sold lunch boxes to the building's residents, saved every penny as if it were gold. My hands bled from washing dishes during the day, but at night they created something that people wanted, something they paid for. For the first time since I arrived, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I could survive. What if the leftovers from someone else's life were the beginning of your own story? Comment below. When was the moment you transformed something discarded into an opportunity? 2 weeks later, I no longer fit in that room. Not physically, but emotionally. I had customers, people knocking on my door every day asking for food. I cooked in the early hours of the morning, packed everything in old jars that I washed and reused, and sold it for such a low price that it barely covered the ingredients. But it didn't matter. I was building something small, invisible, but mine. Until one day, one of the women who bought my lunchboxes said something to me. I didn't understand the words, but she gestured, pointing outside, to the street, and then to the food. She was telling me to try selling outside, on the street, to real people, not just to those who lived in that forgotten building. The idea terrified me. I had never sold anything on the street. I had never exposed my work like that to strangers who could simply ignore me, laugh, or worse, humiliate me. But the money was running out, and if I wanted to leave that room, if I really wanted to change my life, I needed to take a risk. So I made extra lunch boxes. I woke up at 3 in the morning, cooked as much as I could, piled everything into a cardboard box, and went out into the street before sunrise. I chose a busy corner, near commercial buildings, where I saw people rushing by every morning. I put the box on the ground, sat down beside it, and waited. The first few hours were silent. People passed quickly, glanced at it, looked away. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked. I felt invisible again. But this time, the invisibility hurt differently, because I was offering something of value, something made with care, and yet nobody wanted it, until a man in a suit stopped. He looked at the lunch boxes, then at me. He said something in English that I didn't understand, but the tone was clear. It was contempt. He laughed, a short, dry laugh. He pointed to the food and made a negative gesture with his head, as if saying it was worthless. Then he turned his back and walked away. I stood there, holding that cardboard box, feeling people pass by me as if I were part of the sidewalk. I went home with all the lunch boxes, no sales, not a penny, no sign that this was going to work. I went into my room, put the box on the floor, sat on the bed, and for the first time since I arrived, I seriously thought about giving up. I thought about going back. I thought about accepting that I had failed, that 68 years old was too late to dream. But then I looked at those lunch boxes. I looked at the food I had made with so much care, and I thought, if nobody wants to buy it, it's because they don't know what they're missing. It's not the food that's wrong. It's the way I'm presenting it. I took an old notebook I had in my suitcase. I started writing, taking notes, doing calculations, thinking about strategies. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I needed to change something. I needed to be seen differently, not as an old woman selling food on the street, but as someone who had something unique, something that nobody else could offer. I spent the whole night awake, scribbling down ideas, some absurd, others impossible. But in the middle of that messy notebook, I found something, a direction, a plan. And the next day, I went back to that same corner. But this time, I took something more than just lunchboxes. I took determination. I took the certainty that that man in the suit, the one who laughed at me, would one day regret it. For 3 weeks, I went back to that corner every day, always at the same time, always with the same lunchboxes. And little by little, some faces started to repeat themselves. There was a man who passed by every day at 7 in the morning, a woman in a nurse's uniform who ran to catch the bus, a young man with a backpack who looked like a student. They saw me. I knew they saw me. But nobody stopped, until one day, in a light rain, when I was almost giving up again, the young man with the backpack stopped in front of me. He looked at the lunchboxes, then at me. He said something. I didn't understand, but from his expression, it seemed like a question. I opened one of the lunchboxes and showed it to him. He smelled it. I saw something change in his face. Curiosity, interest. He took some coins out of his pocket, handed them to me, and took a lunchbox. He didn't even wait to get home. He opened it right there on the sidewalk, in the rain. He took the plastic fork I had, put inside, and ate the first bite. He stopped. He chewed slowly. He closed his eyes for a second, and when she opened it, she looked at me in a different way, as if she had discovered something unexpected. The next day, he returned, and he brought a friend. The day after that, he returned with 2 more. Within a week, I had a line. Small, but it was a line. People waiting to buy my food. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't process that this was really happening. I worked at the restaurant during the day, cooked at dawn, sold on the street in the morning, and at night, I collapsed from exhaustion. My hands were always sore, my feet swollen. My spine screamed in pain. But for the first time in years, I had hope. Until one of those days, a different man appeared in the line. He was older, well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. He bought a lunchbox, ate silently leaning against a lamppost, and when he finished, he came over to me. He spoke slowly, as if he knew I didn't understand him. Well, he pointed to the food, nodded, and took a card out of his pocket. He wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. An address, a phone number, and one word I could understand: business. I took that paper home and asked one of the building's residents, who spoke both languages, to translate it for me. She read it and was surprised. The man wanted to invest. He wanted to help me open a permanent business, a real place, not on the street. He asked if I would accept. I remained silent, because the last time I trusted someone, I lost everything. The last time I let someone else make decisions for me, I was left with nothing. No home, no dignity, no daughter. And now this man, whom I didn't even know, wanted to enter my life, offering money, offering opportunity. Part of me wanted to believe. I desperately wanted to believe that there are good people in the world. But another part, the part that was destroyed, screamed, "Don't trust. Not again." But then I thought, if I don't take the risk, I'll be stuck on that corner forever, selling lunchboxes in the rain, sleeping in a shared room, washing dishes until my hands bleed. And that wasn't what I promised myself, so I arranged a meeting with him. I took the resident as my translator. We sat down at a cheap cafe. He explained everything. He said he'd eaten at expensive restaurants his whole life, but nothing compared to what he felt when he tasted my food. He said it had soul, that it was rare, that people would pay a lot for it if it were presented the right way. He offered to pay the rent for a small space for 6 months. He said it would be an investment, that he wanted a small percentage of the profit, but that the restaurant would be mine. My name, my food, my decision. I looked at him and asked, through the translator, why he would do that. He smiled and said something that surprised me. He said his mother was an immigrant, that she died without realizing her dream of having her own business, and when she saw a woman her age selling food on the street, she felt she had to do for me what she couldn't do for herself. I accepted. I signed papers I could barely read. I trusted. And for 3 months, it was magical. We found a small, cramped space, but it was ours. Well, it was more mine than his. At least, that's what I thought. We painted the walls together. I chose every detail: the tablecloths, the plants in the window, the board with the handwritten menu. I opened on a Saturday morning. I put on a clean dress I bought at a thrift store, tied my hair up, and waited. The first customers were those who bought my lunchboxes on the street. They came, they sat down, they ate, and when they finished, they applauded. I cried in the kitchen, hidden away, so no one would see, because for the first time in my life, I felt I had built something that was truly mine. The following weeks were intense. Lines formed. People waited more than an hour to get a table. Social media started talking about that 68-year-old woman who cooked like no one else. Journalists came, bloggers, people with cameras wanting to film everything. And I, who had always been invisible, was suddenly being seen. But then things started to change. The investor, the man who said the restaurant would be mine, started showing up more often. He brought lawyers. He talked about expanding, about trademarks, about franchising. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I agreed because I thought he knew. more than I did, until the day a customer asked me why the restaurant wasn't named after me. I found it strange. I looked at the storefront, and only then did I realize the name that was there was his name. The trademark was in his name. Everything was in his name. I confronted him. I brought the same resident who helped me translate. The three of us sat at an empty table after work. I asked why the restaurant was registered in his name if the agreement was that it would be mine. He made excuses. He said it was for legal reasons, that since I didn't have complete documentation, I didn't have a credit history, it would be impossible to put it in my name. He said it was temporary, that when I got my paperwork in order, he would transfer everything. But the way he spoke, the way he looked away, told me something else. He was lying. I started over, but this time without intermediaries, without promises from men in suits, without signed papers. I didn't understand. Some of the people who contacted me got organized. They did an online fundraiser. I don't know exactly how it works, but in 2 weeks they had raised enough money for me to rent a space. Tiny, half the size of the other one, but it was truly mine. I signed the contract. I paid the rent. I chose every pot, every spoon, every napkin. There was no luxury. The chairs were mismatched, bought on sale. The tables had scratches. I painted the walls myself, with the help of neighbors who offered. But it was mine, completely mine. The night before the opening, I couldn't sleep. I sat in that empty space, looking at everything I had managed to build, and I thought about the woman who had arrived there with 500 rays and an old suitcase. I thought about how she couldn't imagine she would be able to get this far, and I cried, not from sadness, but with such deep pride that it hurt in my chest. I opened the doors on a Sunday morning. I had prepared food for 30 people, thinking that was overly optimistic. 50 people showed up, then 80, then more than 100. The line went around the block. People who had eaten at the other restaurant and came looking for me. People who saw my story on social media. People who simply wanted to support me. I cooked non-stop. I sweated. I cried from exhaustion and happiness at the same time. And each dish that came out of my kitchen carried a piece of my soul. Because it wasn't just food. It was resilience. It was proof that you can lose everything twice and still get back up. In the first few months, I slept in the restaurant. Literally. I put a mattress on the kitchen floor and woke up before sunrise to start preparing everything. I didn't have the money to hire anyone. I did everything myself. Shopping, preparation, service, cleaning, everything. My back hurt so much that sometimes I couldn't get up properly. But it didn't matter, because for the first time, the exhaustion was mine. The pain was mine. The success was mine. Until one day, a food critic showed up. I didn't know who he was. Only later, when someone told me, did I understand his importance. He ordered 3 different dishes. He ate in silence. He took notes. And he left without saying anything. I was scared. I thought he was going to write something bad, that he was going to say my restaurant was too simple, too old, that I was too old for that. But a week later, his review came out. And what he wrote changed everything. He said he had eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants all over the world, that he had tasted creations by renowned chefs, but that never, in his entire career, had he felt what he felt when he ate my food. He said it wasn't technique, it wasn't presentation, it was something impossible to teach in culinary school. He called it emotional memory, love translated into flavor, soul on the plate, and he finished by saying, I ate the story of a woman who refused to give up, and that's the best seasoning there is. After that, the restaurant exploded. International journalists came, television programs requested interviews, and suddenly I was no longer just a lady who cooked well. I was a symbol. But with fame came something I didn't expect. The ghosts also came. A group of investors contacted me. They weren't like the first ones. These came from large companies, with proposals printed on expensive paper, with numbers I never imagined seeing in my life. 20 million reais. They wanted to buy my restaurant, turn it into a franchise, spread it all over the world, put my name, my face, my story in hundreds of places. They said I would be rich, that I would never have to work again, that I could finally rest. I sat down with them in a formal meeting. I had lawyers by my side this time, people I hired, people who worked for me. I read every line of the contract. I understood every word, and for the first time, I had the power to choose. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't without options. I had something of value, and they wanted it. But while they talked about expansion, about profit, about the global market, I looked out the office window and saw my restaurant across the street. I saw people coming in. I saw the line. I saw a lady sitting alone at a table, eating slowly, with her eyes closed, savoring each bite. And I understood one thing. If I sold it, it would cease to be mine. It didn't matter if my name was on the facade. It didn't matter if my face was on the posters. It would become a product. It would become profit. It would become something reproducible, copyable, soulless. And everything I went through, everything I built, would be transformed into money. And money, I've learned, disappears. It's taken away. It's stolen. It's lost. But soul? No one can take away a soul. So I said no. The lawyers were shocked. The investors tried to negotiate. They increased the offer, 25 million, 30. But I kept saying no, because I finally understood that wealth isn't the number in your bank account. Wealth is waking up every day and doing what you love. It's serving food to people who thank you with their eyes. It's knowing that each dish that comes out of your kitchen carries your story, your truth, your resilience. They left frustrated. And when they left, I sat alone in that empty meeting room and smiled. I smiled because I had just refused a fortune, and I felt richer than ever. But the decision had consequences. The media loved the story. Elderly. Woman refuses millions to maintain the essence of the business. It became headline news. It became an inspiration. But it also became a target. Because when you refuse to play the money game, the people who live off that game don't like it. The former investor, the one who robbed me, started spreading lies. He said my food wasn't hygienic, that I used expired ingredients, that the restaurant was a scam. He paid for negative online reviews. He sent inspectors to the restaurant every week looking for any irregularities. He tried everything to destroy me. And for a moment, he almost succeeded. Customers started questioning. The lines got shorter. I saw fear in people's eyes, fear of believing me, fear of defending someone who was being publicly attacked. And I understood that this was the hardest part. It's not building something from scratch. It's keeping it standing when the whole world is trying to tear it down. But then something unexpected happened. My old customers, those who knew me from the days of selling lunchboxes on the street, started to organize. They posted old photos. They told their stories. They defended my name. They started a petition. They brought in independent journalists to show the truth. And little by little, the lie crumbled. Because lies are fragile. They need constant maintenance. But the truth stands on its own. The lines returned, longer than before. And the former investor, he closed his restaurant 3 months later. Because without my food, without my story, he had nothing. It was just an empty space with a name on the facade. And people realized that. With the restaurant stabilized and the storm passed, I started thinking differently. I was 70 years old, 70, and I realized I didn't want to work alone anymore. Not out of exhaustion, but because I had learned something. Solitude builds resilience, but community builds legacy. I started hiring people, but not just anyone. I looked for immigrants, people like me, people who had arrived with nothing, without a language, without hope, women who washed dishes elsewhere and dreamed of more, men who carried weight on their backs and dignity in their eyes, young people who had talent but no opportunity. I didn't ask for resumes. I didn't ask for experience. I only asked one thing: tell me your story. And every story I heard was my story again, with different faces, different accents, but the same pain, the same courage, the same desire to prove they were worth more than the world said. I hired 7 people that first month. I taught each of them how to cook my recipes. I hid nothing. I kept no secrets. I showed them every spice, every technique, every detail I learned from my grandmother, because I understood that knowledge that is not shared dies with you. And I didn't want my food to die. I wanted it to live on through other hands, other stories. But I did something no one expected. I transformed the restaurant into a cooperative. I shared the profits. I gave people a voice in the decisions. Every person who worked with me was an owner along with me. They weren't employees, they were partners. And when the lawyers told me that this was risky, that I was giving up control, I replied, "Control is what they tried to have over me, and that's what almost destroyed me. I prefer to share power and build something real than to hold everything and build something empty." The first few weeks were difficult. People who never had a voice suddenly had to decide things. We argued, we disagreed, but always with respect, always remembering that we were all there because someone had given us a chance. And little by little, something beautiful began to happen. The restaurant stopped being about me. It became about us. Each person brought a dish from their culture. We mixed spices, techniques, stories. My food transformed. It became richer, more diverse, more alive. And the customers felt it. They felt they weren't just eating. They were participating in something bigger, in a movement. This proves that people forgotten by the world can build something extraordinary when given the opportunity. The media returned. But this time they didn't just want to talk about me. They wanted to talk about everyone, about the stories of each person who worked there. And each story was a punch in the gut, a reminder that the world is full of wasted talent, of shelved dreams, of invisible people who just need to be seen. The restaurant became a symbol, not of food, but of collective resistance, of recovered dignity, of second chances that turn into first victories. Politicians started using my story in speeches. Businessmen started copying the cooperative model. Schools took students to visit. And I, who had always been invisible, suddenly became an example. But I didn't feel comfortable with that, because I knew the truth. I wasn't special. I was just one among millions who had the courage not to give up. The difference is that I was lucky. Lucky to find good people along the way. Lucky to be in the right place. Lucky to have the health to endure. And not everyone is lucky. So I decided to use my voice to speak for those who don't have one. I started giving talks, telling my story, not to glorify myself, but to show that the system is unjust, that it shouldn't be necessary to work until your hands bleed to have dignity, that immigrants are not threats, they are solutions, they are workers, they are dreamers, they are human, beings who deserve respect. And that's when I understood my true purpose. It wasn't to have a famous restaurant. It was to use that restaurant as a platform to change the narrative, to show that people like me, like us, have value. We have a history. We have the right to exist, to dream, to succeed. What if you could use your success to open doors for those who are still on the outside? What would you do? Comment below. What talent do you see wasted around you that deserves a chance? I was closing the restaurant on a Tuesday night when I saw a group of people standing across the street, 3 adults and a child. They were looking at the storefront, talking quietly, hesitating. Something about those faces seemed familiar. Not the faces themselves, but the expression. Shame mixed with need. I knew that expression well. I finished locking the door and walked over to them. When I got close, the woman took a step back. The older man grabbed her arm, and that's when I recognized his eyes. They were the same eyes as my late husband's. It was his family, the family that had taken everything from me, that had put me out on the street, that had separated me from my daughter. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would explode. All the memories came flooding back at once. The humiliation, the pain, the injustice. I had every right to turn my back, to pretend I didn't see them, to leave them there, with the shame they deserved to feel. But then I looked at the child. She was about 6 years old, too thin, worn-out clothes, and in her eyes I saw hunger. Not the hunger I felt when I arrived here, but real hunger. The hunger of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. The man spoke first. He said they had lost everything, that their businesses had failed, that they were living in a shelter, that they saw my restaurant on the news and came to ask for forgiveness. They weren't asking for food. They were asking for forgiveness, as if forgiveness could erase what they had done, as if apologies could give back the years they had stolen from me. I could feel anger rising. I could feel the urge to scream, to say everything I had held back for years, to make them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. But then, I remembered something my grandmother told me when I was a child. She said, "Revenge is a poison you take hoping the other person will die." And I had spent too much time being poisoned by anger, by resentment, by injustice. If I continued carrying that weight, they would continue controlling me. They would continue having power over me, and I wasn't going to allow that. I took a deep breath. I looked at each of them, and I said, "Come in." The woman started to cry. The man was in shock. But I opened the restaurant door, turned on the lights, and said again, "Come in." I prepared food for them. Not leftovers, not the basics. I prepared the best I had. I put it on the table as if they were important customers, and while I cooked, tears streamed down my face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of liberation. Because forgiving isn't saying what they did was right. Forgiving is taking away their power to continue hurting you. It's choosing your peace over the justice you'll never receive. They ate in silence. The child devoured everything, asked for more. I served, and when they finished, the man tried to speak again, tried to explain himself, but I raised my hand and said, "No need. I didn't come here to hear excuses. I came here to be free, and forgiving you is the last chain I need to break." They left that night carrying lunch boxes I prepared for the next few days, and I stayed alone in the restaurant, sitting at one of the tables, looking at the empty pots, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Real peace. Not the peace of someone who forgets, but the peace of those who remember, feel the pain, and yet choose to move forward without shackles. The next day, the woman returned, alone. She asked to speak with me. She said she wanted to work, that she had no experience but was willing to learn, that she needed to rebuild her life just as I had rebuilt mine. I looked at her and saw something I didn't expect. I saw myself, desperate, lost, needing a chance, and I understood that the cycle is only broken when you offer others what was denied to you. I gave her the job, and today, 2 years later, she is one of the best cooks in my restaurant, not because she has technique, but because she cooks with gratitude. And gratitude seasons better than any spice. People ask me how I managed to forgive, how I managed to employ the person who destroyed me, and I answer, because holding on to anger is living trapped in the past, and I didn't build all this to remain a prisoner. I built it to be free, completely free. Today I am 70 years old. The restaurant remains small. I could have expanded. I could have accepted those millions, but I chose to stay exactly where I am, because I learned that greatness isn't measured in square meters or numbers in a bank account. It's measured in lives transformed, in second chances given, in dignity restored. And every time I look around and see those people cooking beside me, people who arrived with nothing just like I did, I know I made the right choice. You know that man in the suit who laughed at me in the street, who said nobody would eat my food. He came back, not to mock me, but to ask for a job. He had lost everything in a financial crisis. And when he walked through the door of my restaurant, head down, without his former arrogance, I could have turned my back, but I didn't. I gave him the same chance someone gave me. Today, he washes dishes in my kitchen, and every time he puts a clean plate on the pile, I know he remembers. He remembers never to underestimate anyone, especially someone with 500 rays and an impossible dream. And you, who have stayed here until now, listening to my whole story, do you know what this means? It means that something inside you resonated. Maybe you too have lost everything. Maybe you too are starting over. Or maybe you just need to hear that it's possible, that no matter your age, no matter where you come from, no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can get up, and you can build something so beautiful that the whole world will stop to watch. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to keep telling stories like this. Real stories of real people who won when nobody believed in them. And leave a comment saying, "This story is mine too." I want to know that you're here, that you listened, that you felt it. And if you can, leave a like. Not for me, but because the more people see this, the more people will believe that they can too. There's another video over here that will show you another incredible story of starting over. Click and stay with me there. I'll be waiting for you.